The world is filled with apps. Apps that show us how to get to places, apps that tell us the best places to eat, or apps that share the best shows. There's always a new app to connect us to our friends and an app to help us do our job more efficiently. But what makes one of these apps better than the other? What makes them good? Especially in the Internet of Things era, how are we connecting physical technology with digital solutions to create both memorable and impactful experiences? My name is Matthew Solis and I'm a user experience lead for Honeywell Aerospace. And today I'm going to share with you how Honeywell is transforming itself into the next generation of software industrial. We are going to first examine some of the qualities of what makes a good app, and then, when we know what is required for us to make something good, we're going to take a look at how the teams at Honeywell create software products that meet those criteria for both our customers and our business partners across the globe. So before we can create something good, we must first understand what the ingredients are. There are three basic principles when creating digital solutions, and I like to call them the three laws of app design. The first law: a good app knows its audience. Let's think about ourselves for a moment. What apps do you have in your phone right now? Go ahead, let's take a look through our phones. I'm sure there are a handful of apps that we use frequently, some that we use occasionally, and maybe even some that we've opened only to never touch again. Have you ever thought about why you use those particular apps? When did you decide to get it in the first place, and why? In the world of user experience design, teams work very hard to understand an app's audience by creating what we call personas. Personas are what give designers and engineers the direction needed to understand who they're creating these apps for. The better we can understand the users, the better experience that user is going to have. A good app knows its audience, and they do that by understanding the motivations of people intending to use it. A persona is a collection of attributes representing a particular group of people. You may be already familiar with the concept of a persona. You can take a look at some of them here. Let's look at another example. The Snapchat team understood that their audience wanted an easier and more personal way of communicating with friends, and they wanted that communication to be judgment-free. Knowing that, we can see how those values were understood in the core of the design. What's a more personal way of communicating than photos and videos? What is the primary use of Snapchat? Sending these photos and videos. How do you keep a primary communication method judgment-free? Well, they thought you make them disappear after a certain amount of time. I think Snapchat is a great example of when an app knows its true audience. Now, I'd like for you to think about what are some examples of an app knowing its audience and why? What are some examples of when an app didn't know their audience? Are any of those examples currently present in maybe your phone? The second law: a good app solves a problem. Oftentimes, when we think about design, we may get caught in the superficial values of a product or software. But for something to be truly designed well, and this is amplified in the world of apps, the product must solve a problem. There are varying degrees of what we may call problem, but at the core, they may be a problem no less. The desire to stay connected with friends and share moments in each other's lives can be seen as a problem, and there are apps that solve that problem. Facebook, Instagram, as we mentioned before, Snapchat, and there's many more. Even games can be seen as a solution to a problem, with their purpose guiding us to entertainment. One of my favorite examples, Google Maps, or any other map-related software really, is solving a problem that has existed since the dawn of humanity: navigation. If we were to go somewhere new, we must simply search by an associated name, in this case pizza, address, or generalized area, and then, much like a video game, we are presented with a bird's eye view of our location and route to the destination. Good apps solve problems by allowing us to do something easier. They remove the barriers between ourselves and our desired outcomes: destinations, entertainment, connectivity. And by following our first law into our second law, we ensure that we're solving the right problem. Because if I handed you a drill when you really needed a hammer, I'm definitely not helping. The more successful an app is at creating this perceived simplicity, the more we're going to enjoy it, and the more likely we are going to continue using it. What are some examples of an app knowing its audience and why? What are some examples of where you think an app didn't understand its audience and why? The third law: a good app is enjoyable. Only once we have applied both Law 1, understanding our audience, and Law 2, solving their problem, can we begin to consider Law 3, making it enjoyable. Now, this law is the hardest to apply objectively, because making an app enjoyable is about creating an emotional connection with the user. This is where many of the characteristics of traditional design would reside, and when we design for the third law, there are 3 questions that we can use to help us. The first question, does this app look like what it does for me? And what that means is, are the choices of color, the typefaces, the images, the way the app is structured, these are all extremely valuable because these are attributes that create an aesthetic that the user or we may identify with. The second question, does the app communicate with me like I expect it to? How does the app behave? Is it swift and precise or relaxed and playful? How does it respond when I interact with it? When I push a button, swipe left or right, what happens on the screen? Are there sounds to provide some feedback? Are those sounds subtle and simple or prominent and full of character? Are there animations to carry a narrative? How is it speaking to me? Like a friend, like a teacher, maybe even a robot sometimes. These are the traits that give an app a personality, and they are what differentiate an app from a computer program, and that's what makes an app an enjoyable experience. And the last question, but certainly not the easiest to achieve, is does it simply work? With a combination of good design and great technical engineering, an app should always work exactly the way our users expect it to, with minimal friction. No crashing, no bugs, no problems. Because as we remember, an app is made to solve a problem, and it should aim to do that without failure, because only when we can truly trust it do we begin to really enjoy it. At Honeywell, we are creating both software and hardware products that work together in an ecosystem, such as the ecosystem of flight. And to do that, we utilize the principles that we just covered when creating our software products. Here's an example of how we apply these principles to create a product that helps pilots fly the aircraft. As our first law pointed out, we must understand the audience of our solution, and in this case, it is the pilot. We start our journey by researching what it takes to be a pilot so we can understand their goals and motivations. We do this by observing the pilots in context, by riding alongside them, following them to the airport, joining them as they board the aircraft, and observing them in their working environment, in the sky. What does it look like? Is it loud? What are they focusing on? These are all important behaviors to understand because these are the behaviors that provide context and guidance to what the audience really needs. Once we've made our observations, we can begin to synthesize them. In this case, our pilot, safety, navigation, and the speed in which they are provided information for these evolving situations such as weather, allow us to understand their goals and priorities. And once we've understood their goals and priorities, can we move on and apply the second law, which is solving their problem? And to do that, we begin the design process. We start this process with what we call wireframes to illustrate these concepts and ideas that we may have, or anything that comes to our mind when we think about the pilot's objectives. This design process allows us to explore the many different ways to solve a problem and get to an understanding of the workflows required to meet the pilot's needs. And continually, we'll follow this process until we get to what we call a low fidelity prototype. At this stage, this prototype represents a hypothesis. In order to validate our work, we take the prototype back into context and have the pilots use it to achieve specific objectives we were aiming to solve. By measuring parameters such as time on task, ease of use, speed, and efficiency, we can determine the effectiveness of a particular solution. These results will guide the refinement of our hypothesis, and we will continue to follow this design methodology, iterating on our prototypes to the point that we are confident in the product, knowing that it's going to understand the pilot's needs, solve their problems, and throughout the entire process, make it an enjoyable experience. As the world continues to evolve, becoming more connected than ever, my hope is that you walk out of this room remembering these 3 simple laws. And as you enter your careers, beginning to work on real products, whether they be hardware, digital, or both, you'll bring these concepts into your work and into your mindsets, so you're equipping yourself with the tools required to craft good experiences. Because as we move forward, it is these good experiences that improve our lives. Thank you.